Stay on your picture. Leave Nana's picture alone. No, look at me.
So yesterday we started with the fifth top most craved thing in life by university students, and that was meaning in life. They wanted to matter that they live. And today's topic will be love and relationships. Love and relationships. The fourth thing that students at the University of Michigan crave most in life. So without further ado, I'll introduce you guys to Sebastien Braxton, and he'll take it from here.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Because we're talking about love and relationships, I wanted to wear a tie and look nice. It was a very young age that I discovered from my mother that I was a hopeless romantic. I was just one of those kids I'm the oldest of 7, but I was just that kid that was very, very much about relationships and love and romantic. And my mom said, "You're just like me. You're a hopeless romantic." And I'll share a couple stories later on in this presentation to kind of speak to that end, to really talk about the nature of love and relationships. Now, it is no surprise, and it should be no surprise to any of you, that this topic emerged from the surveying that took place on campus. The reality is that many of the college students that attend public universities, you have several different issues with things like STDs. You have several different issues with students who are attending psychological counseling while attending campus. It is primarily due to relationships, either from home relationships, stress and pressures, or it's due through dating relationships that have gone south, or that they've given up their virginity, and they thought that the person loved them, but only to find out the person just had a dare, or they just really wanted to sleep with them, and it was nothing more than just that. So because of that, this particular presentation is designed to speak to love in a very broad sense. And then as I mentioned yesterday, in the second half, after we get some pizza, I'll talk a little bit more from the faith side of things and share some other practical tips about love and relationships. So you'll definitely want to stay for that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the history of love. Love has been around for a long time. We would probably argue that love is as old as time and as old as man himself. As long as there's been one and an other, there has been this thing called love, or at least its potential. When you go back to the Mayan king, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, he was a grandson king, and he built the temple where he was going to be buried. But the record says that he really, really loved his wife. He was really passionate about his love for his wife. So when he built his temple, this is exactly where he's buried, underneath there in 720 AD, he also built a temple for his wife right across from his temple. This is the picture of how it looks. And in their particular temples, what happens is during the spring equinox and the fall equinox, the shadow is cast on one side or the other. So during the spring equinox, right on time when the sun is gone, the shadow of his temple fully encompasses her temple. And then in the fall equinox, the shadow from her temple fully encompasses his temple, so that they're still able to be connected and to love and to kiss and to embrace even in their death and in their tomb. And he designed it this way. You find that anthropologists have discovered that in researching 170 different societies, and that's pretty close to almost all of them, they found that love is always present. Not only from history, but also in a broad sense culturally. Love is something that's ubiquitous. You see, love is something that we sing about. Love is also something that we dance to, right? We dance love. We show love even in the interaction in a dancing number, as you see here in this photo. We also build love. We know what the Taj Mahal is, right? This is this enormous, beautiful edifice for someone that he loved. And we build love. We also write love in terms of poetry, right? I remember being a hopeless romantic as a child, and there was this young girl named Claire. She was a cheerleader. Now, you know, obviously in high school, at least back in my day, I don't know how it is today, but cheerleaders were like very coveted girlfriends. So if you could date a cheerleader, that meant either you were like a prime athlete, or you were like a genius, or you were like literally the most good-looking person in the school. And so Claire and I had started this friendship because we both were in an acting class. And right when I was turning 16, right before I turned 16, I decided to move from Chicago to go to Atlanta to live with my father. And before I left, Claire and I had a pretty good relationship, and I think it was pretty clear that there was interest. But I decided to write a letter, and as I wrote this letter, this nice, passionate letter, I'll never see you again, blah, 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 blah. Signed it, licked it, sprayed a little cologne on it, and put it in the mailbox. Now, a few months later, my mother came to visit me in the summertime. It was about August. School was about to start. And as my mom came down to visit, she said, so I need to talk to you about something. There's a real issue that I have. And I said, sure. So as she came down, she said, so the girl Claire, her dad has called me about 20-something times. Back then, we had caller identification. So this little box said he was calling literally every other minute. And so she's saying, is there something you want to tell me about Claire? I'm like, no, there's nothing I want to tell you. Are you sure? Is she pregnant? My mother is a very blunt woman, so she would just come and ask you directly. Is she pregnant? Have you guys been having sex? Blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, this is really awkward. I'm 15 years old. My mom's trying to engage with me in a conversation on intimacy. So I said, no, Ma, I have not slept with her. She's like, don't lie to me. So then she starts checking my room, see if I have condoms, all these different things. So I was like, Ma, this is just really over the top. She says, okay, well, here's the thing. I'm going to call her dad back, and I better not hear that you actually slept with her. I said, I promise you will not hear that for sure. So come to find out, Claire had received the mail from her parents while she was at cheerleading camp. While she received the letter, she opened it, and as she read it, and it was the super dramatic language that I was, as a hopeless romantic, and she thought to herself, oh no, Sebastien left. She thought that I might have attempted suicide because I said this will be the last time that we will see you again. So she called her parents immediately at cheerleading camp and said, I think Sebastien might have killed himself. Can you call his mom? So then he kept calling my mom, and the fact that he wasn't getting a response made him even more nervous. So finally, my mother called him back, and she said, no, I'm apologizing for missing your calls. And he said, Mrs. Braxton, is Sebastien still alive? She said, yes. He said, okay. I was just calling to make sure that he did not kill himself. And she said, why would he have killed himself? She said, well, Claire received the letter that he wrote. My mom said, can I get a copy of that letter? Your worst nightmare. So then my mom came back, showed me the letter. She said, why would you write this? I was like, this was not supposed to be read by any other eyes. And I said, when I said I wasn't going to see her again, it's because I was moving. Had nothing to do with the fact that I was going to try to kill myself. I would never kill myself over a woman. But I, again, had a poem included in there, and love is something that we write. Also, love is something that we kill for. People kill for love. There's a lot of crimes of passion that happen in the world. Also, you find that people die for love. This is a classic picture of Romeo and Juliet, and we all know the story, right? Taking the pill to kill yourself, the poison. So it's like, oh, well, if she's dead, then I'm going to kill myself, but actually she wasn't dead, so then she wakes up, and then she realizes, well, he actually did kill himself, so now she's going to kill herself. I mean, it's just like people die for love. Love is just this ubiquitous thing. But let's ask ourselves the question, how do we really define love? If love is so universal, if love has such a rich history in terms of edifices and various types of cultures and societies, how exactly do we define this thing called love? Well, there was an individual who had mentioned the fact that in the time in which we live, we oftentimes look at love in a very unique way. And the way in which we look at love is about us being desired. And as we desire to be desired is the way that he views love. He says, well, think about the fact, right? We say we love our car. This is the looseness of how we use the term, right? I love my car. We also say I love pizza. There's pizza sitting in the back. Somebody is already salivating. Or we say, I love my wife. Now, in these various things that I love, because we use the term so loosely, it creates a problem of trying to define. What do you mean you love pizza? What you really mean is you enjoy the flavor upon your palate, on your tongue, right? It brings pleasure to the brain. When you say you enjoy your car, you like the feeling that your car brings, right? The fact that you drive your Lamborghini down the road and everyone's heads are turning and everything, and you offer a nice, pretty girl a ride, and she's probably not going to turn you down, not because of you, but because of the type of car you're driving. But there's something unique about loving my wife. See, the thing about loving my wife is the fact that my wife can actually reciprocate. She can actually love me back. The pizza does not appreciate the fact that I appreciate the pizza. The pizza's not going to say, oh, I'm glad that you like me. I like you too. Nor will the car respond in the same way. So Jan Dal Aglio, this is how he defines love. He says, it is the desire of being desired. When people think about love, they're not talking about the love that they have for pizza or for technology or cell phones. When they talk about love, they're talking about loving something that can actually love them in return. They desire something that can also desire them at the same time. It's to be in this experience of this concomitant desire that is happening at the same time. I desire you, you desire me, and then we're engaging in the pursuit of each other together. The desire of being desired. And so the question Aglio brings out is, he says, how then in our economy and in our society, the question is raised, how do we become and remain desirable? That becomes the question. If love is this thing that I desire to be desired, how do I become desirable to someone, and how do I remain desirable to them in an ongoing basis? He says back in the day, it was the submission to community rules that made the difference. You see, back in the olden times, and even in certain cultures upon the earth, as long as you follow certain community rules, you will automatically be fit for marriage. Someone will want to marry you. So if you go to certain parts of Africa, certain parts of Asia, when I remember going to South Africa and Botswana about 12 years ago, and I was speaking at the University of Wits in Johannesburg. And while I was there, two young people came to me and they said, Sebastian, we're kind of in this relationship situation. So they began to explain to me their relationship problems. And I began to give advice, but the problem was they said, well, we're actually engaged. I said, you're actually engaged? I thought you said you just started dating 6 months ago. Well, they said, you see, in our culture, in the village where we're from, there is no such thing as dating. As soon as you come and you say, I'm interested in her, she's interested in you, you go back to your parents agree that it's okay for you guys to pursue one another, but it's considered engagement. You're basically going to get married unless you call it off. It's very public, and there's a lot of accountability as a result. As long as you follow those rules, you will end up married. And so in those societies, people always get married and they enjoy. But in our day, it doesn't work that way. Through the introduction of modernity, the freedoms of democracy, the rationalization of scientific research, and also the elements that have come through the combination of these two things, it leads us to the fact that we now have the freedom to value things and people the way that we want to value them. So if I say, well, I'm not really interested, or I don't really value this person, you can post all kinds of devaluing comments about Donald Trump on Twitter. No one's going to say anything to you. That's just how you value him. And the assumption is people do not have inherent value, but that value is given by how many people desire you. And he gave this, and it's interesting, this research came out before social media was where it was today. A lot of research on social media is fascinating on this very point. Did you know that when a person posts something on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram and they receive an enormous amount of response, it creates the same psychological effect that a music artist would feel at a concert when a crowd is clamoring after them? It literally encourages the social media user to disclose more information. And disclosure is always the path to intimacy. Now, in this, at the same token, people who are more likely to disclose information are always more likely to actually not keep that information to themselves. They're actually more likely to share it with other people, ironically enough. But in this social media society where people are posting and you're getting 500 comments and 2,000 shares and all these likes, you feel like you want to post more. Isn't that right? You say, man, these people love this stuff. You keep posting 2,000 likes. You keep posting 10,000 likes. You keep posting, YouTube says you're going to become a YouTube partner. In this particular experience, we think now, okay, I am now a person of value because look at what I'm doing. Look at the response that I'm getting. Look at all the likes and the engagement that my profile is receiving. And we feel devalued if we don't. And so we learn now to be seduction artists. How do I get people to desire me? And we start off with basic things like sex appeal. We also think about money. When you think about how people want it to matter that they lived. I just talked to a young person the other night, and he was saying, well, I'm trying to become a billionaire. And I said, why? I said, what do you think is going to happen to you when you become a billionaire? Oh, look, I'm going to be good. I'm going to be happy. I said, I've sat in the homes of billionaires. They're not very happy people. They're actually very stressed people. I've also talked to very famous people. And when you sit down with very famous people, you immediately discover that, for example, Beyonce shares about how she used to go to the beach and play on her guitar just to sing because she loved to sing. Now Beyonce has to buy her own beach or rent a beach in order to go to the beach and just simply sit down and play a guitar, something that any and every one of us could do. But we assume that if we achieved what Beyonce has achieved, or if we achieved what the President of the United States has achieved, or we had the kind of money that Bill Gates has and the accessibility of things, that all of a sudden things are going to become more satisfying. But the reality is they're not. We continue to recognize our own insecurity, that we are only as valuable as people input upon us. One of the other things we use is fame and popularity, and social media is designed to thrive upon this seduction attribute. Now, Jan goes on to make this statement. He says, I would like to redefine love. Because now we define love as this value, desiring, this issue of, how much do other people value you? He says, I would like to redefine love as tenderness, the capacity to accept the weaknesses of the loved one and be able to engage in self-mockery. You see, the reason why he says this is because you feel like you have to be perfect. And I want you to know that there are many brands who are capitalizing upon this trend in society. Dove has been running campaigns for years. And, because my master's is in communication, studying different brands is an enormously fascinating thing. It actually makes a difference in terms of what people buy and do not buy. And Dove recently just ran a campaign where they talked to young girls to talk to their mothers. And as they engaged, they said, Mom, why do you wear so much makeup? Mom, why are you doing all these different things? And the mom would say, well, why are you posting that kind of picture on Facebook? So then Dove issued a challenge. They said they called all the girls in a high school into the gymnasium. And someone from Dove came and talked to them and said, listen, you don't have to change the angle of your photo. You don't have to edit it. You don't have to add any filters to be beautiful. If you can define and understand your own value, you can recognize the fact that beautiful things don't cry for attention. Beautiful things don't need to be touched and edited. They're beautiful. And so she challenged them to take a natural photo. No makeup, no filters, make sure the light is proper. Just take a natural photo, her and her mom. So they each took selfies and things like this. And then they went to a gallery, they rented out a space, and they hung the photos. As they hung the photos, different people were invited from the high school, their own peers. Can you imagine? Their own peers were invited. And they had little sticky notes, and they were to leave different notes on the different photos to comment. And they were so surprised to find that in these natural photos, people would leave messages like nice smile, beautiful skin, I love your eyes, things like this. And the girls were so shocked, and so were their mothers, that people would respond this way in a natural photo. Can you imagine that now that is a phenomenon? You're less likely to find a natural photo than you are to find an actual edited photo. You'd be hard-pressed to find it. And what he's basically saying is self-mockery is about us challenging ourselves on our own weaknesses. We need to learn to laugh at ourselves. One of the things that I oftentimes tell speakers and people who travel a lot when they find me at different conferences around the world, they'll say, Sebastien, what's the best advice you can give to me as an up-and-coming speaker, as an up-and-coming leader or businessman? My first word of advice is don't take yourself seriously. Don't take yourself seriously. You can easily get caught up in your own hype. I've spoken to crowds of thousands of people, spoken to very wealthy people, spoken to lawmakers and congressmen, people in politics. You can speak to these people, and people will give you all kinds of accolades, and that was amazing, that was powerful, that really moved my life. But in reality, you know who you are when you go home. People didn't know that one time I was speaking at Eastern Michigan University in 2006, And they had what's called the State of the African American Male Conference. The mayor was there of Detroit. You had governor's office, Muslim leaders, all these different leaders around Michigan. And as I gave the 10-minute invocation before the mayor of Detroit, and I was still very young at the time, I recalled the fact that after I left, where I was working in the educational building for my work study, my boss went back, made business cards with the Eastern Michigan logo, coat of arms, and put my name and information on there. As I walked off the stage, and I was sitting down, I shook hands with the provost and all those people, and she gave me the business card. She said, "You're going to need these." I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Listen, everybody else is going to ask you to come speak for them. Leadership, UMich, Dearborn, UMich Ann Arbor, this group, that group, they're all going to come invite you to speak because of the speech that you just gave." The title was A Courageous Conversation. And I recall coming out of that thing, people had no idea that when I left, right, my shoes were so broken up that my shoes were talking. The top was separating from the sole of the shoe. I got into a car that had no AC. Two of the windows, you wouldn't want to put them down because you won't get them back up. And yet, in that moment of time, you could start believing the hype. But the reality is learning to laugh at yourself and enjoy your weaknesses, engaging in self-mockery, and allowing yourself to also engage in a love relationship of tenderness, where you can accept one another and your capacity to accept their weaknesses, is a powerful agent of sustainable love. Now, let's get into the science of things. Why exactly do we crave love? What is the science behind love? And this is some of the most fun stuff I've ever discovered. First of all, they did a survey of college students, and they found out that 95% of college students have all experienced either they were rejected by someone whom they truly loved, and number two, they rejected someone who truly loved them. I'm sure we all, I'm not going to ask you to show hands because, no one wants to raise their hand and say, "Yeah, I was rejected." But we all have been rejected. We know what it's like, and we've experienced it, and we felt it. 95% of college students acknowledge going through this experience. Now, as we look at this, Helen Fisher, she basically took 17 people who were happily in love and also 15 people who had recently been dumped. They've been rejected. She put them into an MRI machine to scan their brains and to notice the activity. Now, I want you to keep in mind something that you may not pick up on right away. Both of these groups of people are actually neurologically still madly in love. Very madly in love. Now, what she noticed was there was activity in this area of the brain. It's called the ventral tegmental area and also in A10 cells. Now, this is the part of the brain where dopamine is managed, which is a natural stimulant. Now, this is also the part of the brain where this is your reward system. So you do something, you say, "Oh man, I got up early in the morning. I was supposed to get up, get ready for." There's a reward system that happens when you eat good food. Also, this is the part of the brain that when we feel a rush from cocaine, the same part of the brain is engaged. And this part of the brain where love is active, where people who are madly in love, the part of their brain is in this central point that's below the cognitive thinking, that's below the area where the emotions are managed. This is in a whole nother realm. Yes, love involves thinking. Yes, love involves emotion, but it's even deeper than that. And we're talking about your actual biology. We're not just talking about philosophy. Now, what she calls this area is the reptilian core of the brain. Helen Fisher says there's this area of the brain where your wanting happens, where motivation takes place, where focus takes place, where craving takes place. So it's very interesting that even in our biology, the idea of craving is the very area that is awakened by the concept of romantic love. Now, let's talk about the fact then that if we lack love, we will be struggling in terms of motivation, in terms of wanting. If we lack love, we'll also be struggling in terms of focus. When a person is in love, they are very engaged, they are very focused. When you see people in love, you see someone on a date, and they're really enjoying each other's company, they probably don't see anything else in that restaurant. They're probably not even aware of what the music is in the background. And then on the other side, they become hypersensitive to everything. Oh, the candles are nice. Oh, that music in the background is great. Oh, I like how you did this with your hair. There's just this huge amount of focus. They remember everything. And then they're in the conversation, right? And I can speak from a guy's perspective, right? You're hanging on every single word that that girl says. She's like, yeah, so where are you from? Well, from where in Pennsylvania? Okay, yeah. And we start calculating in our brain. Do I know anything about Pennsylvania? Do I know anyone in Pennsylvania? We're trying to make a connection because the mind is focused. If we have a lack of love, we also have a lack of craving. You know, at the very heart of this series that we're doing on CRAVE is this issue of love. When people say they want it to matter that they lived, they're also expressing an issue and a concern for love. Now, when she researched the brains of people who had just recently been dumped, what she noticed was that the VTA area of the brain was actually even more active than when the person was in love and in the relationship. And the reason for this is the fact that in this part of the brain that is engaged in romantic love, the person becomes more in love when they cannot have the thing that they want. So now that you've been dumped, now that you've been rejected, this part of your brain becomes even more engaged. And now you desire this thing even more than you desired it when you had it. The second part of the brain was the nucleus accumbens, which is where you do gains and losses. This is where risk is managed in your mind. So we're not talking about basic risk, like, hey, should I just try to jump over this thing, or should I take the shortcut to class? We're not talking about that. We're talking about enormous risks, huge gains and huge losses, right? These are the people who are like, you know what? I think I can win her back. I'm going to buy this $2,000 ticket to where she's working over in Athens, Greece, and I'm going to take some rocks and throw it on her hotel window and profess my love and buy all this stuff. This is why people are doing crazy stuff for love. And I know some of us have already done some crazy things for love. See, we might be able to look all nice and intelligent here, but we all know the truth. Let me go on. I don't want to hammer on that point. The third part of the brain is the part of the brain that is involved in deep attachment. The fascinating thing that Helen Fisher learned was that when you are rejected and when you are dumped, you actually become more deeply attached to the person. When you combine all these things, where number one, I'm more in love with you now that I don't have you than I was when I was with you. Number two, I am literally in a state where I'm willing to gamble it all to try to win you back. And on top of that, I am deeply attached to you. It is hard for me to imagine my life without you. Isn't that what people say? I can't imagine my life without you. Terence, the Roman poet, he said this. He said, the less my hope, the hotter my love. When I was in high school, after that Claire incident, you thought I would have learned my lesson, right? No, I didn't learn my lesson. There was this girl named Leah. She was on the drill team. I was there in Atlanta, and we were good friends, and so I said, you know what, I'm going to write her a letter. So I wrote this letter because I didn't have the courage to actually go to her face. Gave her this letter. Next day I came to class, and half the football team was in my class. And the captain of the football team, he and I were pretty good friends. So as soon as I come in there, we had study hall the way they do it in Georgia. And as I'm sitting down, all of a sudden, Greg comes over to me, the captain of the football team, and says, so Sebastian, Leah, I love your eyes, and I appreciate da-da-da-da-da. He had the letter in his hands. He said, oh boy, this guy's in love. Whole class's attention. It was like the worst study hall in my entire history of my existence. And I thought to myself, why did this girl give this guy this letter? So we talked after class, and I said, Leah, why did you give Greg the letter? She said, I thought it was cute. Cute. I was like, this. So I just remember hanging my head and just feeling like the fact, the less the hope, the hotter the love. The funny thing was, I actually liked her even more after that. This is how you know sometimes love doesn't make any sense. Why do we fall in love with one person, though? We understand neurologically what's happening in the brain, but how do you choose out of the crowd? Psychologists will tell you, well, usually it's the person of the same socioeconomic background, same religious views, same general level of intelligence, same general level of good looks. This is usually what psychologists will tell you, but it does not answer the question. Now I'm heading to my conclusion, to something called the experiment of love. There was a woman named Mandy Len Catrone, and she basically took a study that was published by Arthur Aron, and this is what the goal was. The goal was to make two complete strangers ask and answer 36 increasingly personal questions and then stare into each other's eyes without speaking for 4 minutes. This is exactly what the test was. Let me give you some examples of the questions. Question number 12 is, if you could wake up tomorrow having gained one quality or ability, what would it be? Question number 28, when did you last cry in front of another person? By yourself. Do you notice they're getting increasingly personal? Question number 30, tell your partner, this is the stranger that you're doing in the study, what you like about them. Be very honest this time, saying things you might not say to someone you just met. This is question number 30. So you can imagine going through these 36 questions, it was rumored in Mandy's lab that two of the strangers that they had done this study with were getting married and invited the entire laboratory to the wedding. So she thought, this can't be true. She went to find out it was true. So you know what she did? Mandy tried it herself. The experiment of falling in love. So she took the 36 questions that lead to love. She applied those questions with a person that she did not know, and now they are in love. She fell in love with him. They're actually dating. She published an article in January 2015 in the New York Times to talk about, hey, to fall in love with anyone, do this. And she published her story. New York Times, this thing blew up. She was like all in the eye. Good Morning America, everybody wanted this girl. But the funny thing is, she always appeared on TV without her boyfriend. And everyone's question to her is, are you guys still together? Are you guys still together? Now, the goal of the study, when it was first published by Arthur Aron, he says, these 36 questions and the 4 minutes of staring in the person's eyes without saying anything, he says the goal was actually to foster interpersonal closeness among college students. If you want to create community and closeness in your group on campus, these are the questions that he did the research to prove. You will feel like you are better friends after you answer these 36 questions. And this is how he said it would be done. You can build closeness among people if you create sustained, escalating, reciprocal, personalistic self-disclosure. It has to continually increase. It has to be ongoing. It has to be reciprocal. It has to be very, very personal. And it has to be you disclosing about yourself. You can't be exposed. This is literally how he did it, and this is how she did it. This study was published all over the world, and people started trying it. Now, as we go to the conclusion of this first part of our presentation, I want to remind you of the very fact that in these 36 questions that she answered and eventually fell in love with the person, they're actually still together in a relationship. But her conclusion was the fact that falling in love is the easy part. The hardest part is staying in love. And she recognized that when people would ask her the question, are you guys still together? Their question wasn't really about, do the 36 questions work? That wasn't really their question. Their question was really more, how do you decide who deserves your love? Does love actually work? Is there a formula that I can find so that I can maintain the fire in my relationship? As Jan had mentioned, not just to be desired, but to remain desirable in an ongoing fashion. I'm going to answer that question in our next presentation after we have some pizza. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, David.